Its causes are nothing to do with us, say faintly smug-sounding Britons. Not so fast. The Italian legal system is poring over claims that local authorities there were sold financial products by banks based in London which they couldn't have understood. Newsnight has discovered that whistleblowers within those banks who highlighted what they felt were misselling were fired, and their complaints to the FSA routinely ignored. Joe Lynham has been to Milan and to Sicily to find out more.
This is a tragedy of operatic proportions, of London-based banks making massive profits on inappropriate deals in Italy. With a cast of characters speaking exclusively to Newsnight, we reveal the role that the City of London has played in pushing Italy to the brink.
At least on the surface, it was a great deal. The Italians thought they would get money basically for free.
And of whistleblowers telling Newsnight about the culture of greed in London-based banks. And an Italian hero speaking in his first UK TV interview who fought the banks without any help from the British regulator.
I saw no intervention from the FSA into any London-based banks.
And as the Eurozone limps from crisis to crisis, the consequences of this scandal might be more than just financial for all of Europe.
We will have a social revolt and a civil war.
The home of opera, Barolo and gelato is turning sour. Its debt levels are as high as Greece, GDP is shrinking and a bailout looms. And just like Spain, Italy's regional governments may be the straw that breaks the federal back.
Apart from inventing banking, the Italians also invented opera. And the world's most famous opera house is here in Milan, La Scala. It needed extensive renovations about a decade ago, and much of the money was funded from London-based investment banks. At the time, the deals were very good value. In fact, they were too good to be true. And we all know about things that are too good to be true.
Investment banks invented something far more creative and profitable than opera, called derivatives. These perfectly formed financial instruments were sold almost as a risk-free way to borrow. But a House of Lords ruling banned all banks from selling derivatives to British local authorities, so some of them sought less well-protected customers overseas. Here's how it worked. The region or city would borrow money by issuing a bond, usually tens of millions of euros, which would be bought by the investment bank, who would in turn sell it on to other banks. That's the easy bit. Next, banks offered to manage the repayments of that bond by selling the cities a derivative called a swap. But built into the fine print of that were clauses which put taxpayers in Italian provinces on the hook for complicated gambles by London-based banks, although the banks would say their customers were made aware of the risks involved. In one case, an Italian region had been unwittingly sold a swap, the fine print of which meant that it, rather than the bank, would have to pay out if Greece ever defaulted on its debts, something which came to pass last March. And it wasn't just Milan. The financial engineering spread to every corner of Italy, even being sold to universities and hospitals.
At least on the surface, it was a great deal. The Italians thought they would get money basically for free because they would get advance money to be repaid in decades to come. And they didn't have the technical capacity to analyze those deals, and oftentimes they depended on expert and financial advisors who were in fact paid by the banks, so their counterparts who had no incentive to protect the interest of the Italian authorities. So they ended up taking on risks that are much higher than what was appropriate for them, and taking risk that later on could lead to even bankruptcy.
The irony is that the federal government in Rome actively encouraged its cities and regions to borrow directly from London-based investment banks. The idea was to get the borrowing figure for Rome down in order to join the euro. Between 1997 and 2007, borrowing from regional Italian governments went from 0 to 111 billion euros.
But the banks didn't bet on Milan's chief prosecutor, Alfredo Robledo. In his first British television interview, he told Newsnight how he discovered that his city was potentially liable for billions of pounds to London-based banks and doggedly pursued them despite their somewhat secretive ways.
Il loro comportamento non è stato leale, non è stato trasparente.
Their behaviour wasn't honest, nor was it transparent. It allowed them to make profits which ordinarily would never have been possible. And afterwards, they refused to show us their records or what they'd earned. Politicians across Europe need to face this challenge, and people need to wake up to what's going on, or nothing will change. Banks threaten to take their capital out of countries if regulation comes in, but we need regulation, because these banks are plundering society.
Perché questo è un saccheggio della società.
Having at first ignored him, the investment banks UBS, Deutsche Bank and JP Morgan changed tack when Robledo's team raided their Italian offices and locked the staff out of the buildings they were working in. After 2 years of stonewalling, these banks paid Milan a settlement of €500 million and tore up the offending contracts without, of course, admitting any guilt.
So if Milan, the wealthiest part of Italy and the financial capital of the country, can fall for these deals with their landmines in the small print, what chance then for the poorest parts of Italy, like Calabria and Sicily?
Parts of the Mezzogiorno are like a different country. Just a few metres from the main road in the Sicilian capital Palermo, people sell their belongings in a makeshift market to get a few extra euros. Sicily borrowed around €2.5 billion from London-based bank Nomura, using a risky swap to manage the repayments. Now these derivatives have helped bankrupt the region, which needed a €400 million bailout from Rome in July.
Unemployment in places like this can reach as high as 90%, which means the vast majority of people around here are dependent on the region, the city or the state for their living. But the regions and the cities and the state are broke. It's not helped, of course, by the fact that they unwittingly signed contracts with London-based banks, which put the citizens and taxpayers of Italy and regions on the hook for hundreds of millions of euros.
5 miles and a world away from the slums, the new mayor of Palermo says he's cleaning up after a decade of corruption, including inappropriate deals signed with some global foreign banks.
We are speaking about the same banks who are responsible of international world financial crisis. So they destroyed with many street crime the financial system in the world, and one of these street crime was in Sicily.
The mayor doesn't hold back from criticism of former governors of Sicily, one of whom, Salvatore Cuffaro, is currently in jail for his ties to the Cosa Nostra, with another facing similar charges. Mr. Cuffaro also had ties to offshore bank accounts into which tens of millions of euros in facilitation fees were paid by the London-based Nomura Bank, supposedly in order to persuade Sicily to sign these lucrative loan contracts. The activities of former politicians, banks and middlemen in Italy could, according to Mayor Orlando, have far-reaching consequences.
If we don't counter with the really strong activity, with the great intervention of the national government, there is the risk that we will have a social revolt and a civil war.
When a felon's not engaged in his employment.
But why didn't anyone do something in the face of what appears to be obvious misselling? Well, some people did put their heads above the parapet. One senior banker, Piero Burragato, formerly with Nomura, told Newsnight, During my employment at Nomura, I blew the whistle in relation to breaches of FSA rules and principles by some of my managers, also regarding derivative sales in Italy. And as per FSA procedure, I informed the managers of such concerns, then internal compliance, then the most senior management of Nomura. He also informed the FSA after he was forced out of his job. But the bank and an employment tribunal refused to recognise him as a whistleblower who would have been protected under UK law. Nomura said it wouldn't comment on individual cases. Despite these laws designed to protect whistleblowers, Newsnight has uncovered a startling fact. Not a single UK-based bank has ever been punished for forcing out individuals for highlighting concerns within his or her bank. And the FSA has formed. This man, we'll call him John, also blew the whistle at a London-based investment bank on a different matter, and he too was fired. Speaking exclusively to Newsnight, he told us how he was portrayed as a malcontent by his bank for highlighting problems within it.
You got fired by the firm for blowing the whistle. What sort of modus operandi do banks adopt once they have a whistleblower within their ranks?
No risk manager wants to admit that he didn't do his job, so an unholy alliance of mutual self-interest kicks in. So they'll do anything to badmouth a whistleblower as an underperformer. They have a 100% success record.
John also wrote to the FSA many times with his story. On one occasion, the watchdog wrote back saying that it wouldn't be acting on his information and told him never to contact them again. In fact, FSA inaction has been the central theme of the financial crisis, with many accusing it of being too close to the banks, a watchdog who slumbered instead of barking or biting.
The role of the FSA has been very much in the spotlight. I think the banks, if they were able to, would reduce the FSA's powers. But in terms of the FSA's surveillance of London-based banks, I saw no intervention from them.
Take one consideration with another.
The FSA conceded that no bank had ever been sanctioned for firing a whistleblower and that they couldn't comment on individual cases. Back in Italy, the banks at the centre of this derivative story now face civil and criminal action against them from several cities and regions. Some of these regions have even stopped repaying the banks until these cases are settled. All of the banks approached by Newsnight refused to answer any of our questions. Many didn't wish to comment in light of ongoing legal proceedings. All of them deny wrongdoing.